What's up, Summoners? King Blair here. Today, for Top 5 Tuesday, we're going to be talking about the top 5 slot machine units in Epic 7. Now, this list is not going to be ordered by how strong the unit is, but rather how much RNG is actually in their kit to actually work, where in some cases, if the unit high rolls, you get some nutty effects and probably win and have a ton of fun. But if they don't get good RNG, you're probably just going to lose and you're going to be really, really sad, right? So if you like the video, make sure you like, subscribe, and your Discord server, link down in the description. Without further ado, let's get right into it. As always, if you think I missed a unit or you really like the unit or just want to comment, let me know down in the comments down below. I do read all of them, at least for the first day after the video is posted, and I do try to reply to all of them. But with that, let's actually get right into this list. So what's the motivation behind this list? Well, we just came up on RTA season that was riddled with RNG, with Violet, Evasion, counterattacks, 15%. If you guys know, control skills always have a 15% chance of getting resisted. Evasion, counterattack is not 100%. And I was like, Epic 7's actually not a game that's as consistent as I thought. The more you think about it, there's a lot of RNG in Epic 7 for how serious people take it competitively, right? So it really got me thinking. I was like, let me see the units. And when I was looking at the units, I saw there's actually a lot of RNG type units, but there's bigger RNG units in the game that I was like, man, that's a lot of RNG when you really get down to it. So with that spiel out of the way, let's get to the honorable mentions to actually set the mood. But we are starting off with units that you're very familiar with, and it's going to be the Evasion units, Violet, Rylet, to an extent Assassin Card 2 Helm, as well as Rinn. Now, you may be wondering, why are these honorable mentioned and they're not higher? Well, their kits are actually not as RNG as you actually may think, right? So when we look at a unit like Violet, if I can find them, there he is. He actually only really has the Evasion, right? You have a 45% chance to hit and a 55% chance to miss, right? Pretty simple. And if it's water, you're 100% chance guaranteed to miss on him, right? And he is guaranteed to get a counterattack. He's guaranteed to use the S3 and max stacks, and he is guaranteed to get stacks whenever he uses certain skills, right? So that part is actually really consistent, right? He's counterattacking when he evades. The only real check is that evasion. I'm kind of ignoring the S1 because yes, it has a debuff, but it's not really as critical. Although it is sometimes critical in certain situations. But again, he also does have this. So that's only 2 slots for like a Violet, which is the evasion, right? It's just the evasion and whether or not he lands at attack break. Everything else is going to happen, right? And it can feel very frustrating because it's so much RNG, but a lot of the kit's actually consistent, which is why he's been so good for such a long time. In a way, it's kind of consistent. It's just gonna happen X amount of times. Same thing with Rylet to an extent, although it's 70 and 30, where he can evade 70 and get hit 30. Again, does have the debuff on the S1, but he's gonna do kind of what you expect him to do, unless he high rolls you and evades you, right? And this is just a baseline, right? So these units, yes, they're very RNG. Yes, I'm not trying to say they're not RNG. They are, or they wouldn't be in this video, and they're very slot machine, and that's the type of video that we're gonna be making today. On the same hand, we also have a unit like Rinn, who realistically only really has the counterattack mechanics, right? If you hit her allies, she has a 20% chance to trigger. If you hit her, she has 30% chance because she's usually going to be on counterattack. But things like the decreased hit chance and the S1 decreased defense, even though they're not 100% and they are control skills, because of her demon mode, that RNG goes away, right? She's guaranteed to actually land that decreased hit chance, and if you soul burn, she's guaranteed to land the decreased defense. She's guaranteed to get that second attack on demon mode, and she's guaranteed to get that demon mode when a unit dies, right? There's a lot of predictable things that can happen, even though, yes, she's extremely RNG in the fact that if she doesn't counterattack, she does nothing, or she does a lot. And wait, did I say that right? If she does counterattack, she does a lot. If she doesn't counterattack, she just kind of sits there. So again, that's kind of the mood, right? They're very RNG and they're very slot machine. Sometimes when you fight them, you really feel like you're pulling on a lever and you're like, am I going to have a good day or am I going to have a bad day? But let's actually get to the top 5, to the units that actually have so much RNG in their kit. And number 5, yes, she is her, but Lion. This unit is very, very RNG. Why? Well, she's the same as Rinn in the fact that if she's on Elra's Sword, she has a 20% chance to counterattack when her allies are hit, and 30% chance if she's on counter set, right? So she has that aspect. But unlike Rinn, she doesn't have demon mode to help her out with the other aspects of her kit, right? So the S3 has a provoke that it is 100%, but the RNG also is in how far you push back between 20 and 40. So you're adding some RNG there, how far you push back. You actually have to land it. There's There's a 15% effectiveness FRS check that you may just miss the debuff, even if you have higher effectiveness, because that's just how the game is structured. And then there's a provoke. Same thing on the S1, you have a 65% chance to actually dispel one buff AoE, which again, there's a 35% chance you don't land that. And then you also have the debuffs that can get 15%ed with the effect resistance effect check that you always have a 15% chance to resist for the decreased speed and the decreased hit chance. So two different buffs, right? So not only does she have the counters, the S3 provoke, and the S1s, she also has the fact that if you don't soul burn this S1, you're also not guaranteed that extra attack on your turn, which is another layer of RNG to Belian, right? There's actually a lot of RNG. And having used Belian a lot, there are games she sits there and does absolutely nothing but look pretty. And there are games where she's countering every single time, landing every strip, and it just feels like the most broken unit on this planet. Very, very much an RNG slot machine unit. Probably the strongest and the most meta one on this list, just because of how good she can be when she high rolls, as well as having the consistency on the S2. But now we move on to number 4, and we have none other than Silverblade Armentia. If you guys watch the channel, you guys watch me RTA, I do sometimes pick her for fun whenever I'm like, man, I want to have a fun game. And sometimes we see her pop off, you see her crown it and stun it, and then other times she absolutely does nothing and she's a dead pick for me, right? So very, very slot machine type unit. But what does she actually do, and why is there so many checks? Well, a lot of hers is actually because Smaugate didn't want to give her 100%, as well as the effectiveness effect rest checks. I'm going to say that a lot, so just the 15%, right? That's just how I'm going to say it. But when we look at the S3, the stun and the unhealable are 100% chance to actually land, so they're only checking 15% on each of these. And then the burns, on the other hand, though, are only going to be 50%, right, per burn, which means that you have to check 50% twice. There is a chance, and a really good one, that she does not land a single burn, right? It's actually against her favor to land both burns because it's two 50-50s, which means you're probably going to land one but not the other, on top of the 15% effectiveness FRS check, which makes it so it's even lower than 50%, right? You're going to land 1 or 0 most of the time, which does cut her damage by a lot because she's relying on the burns to actually do her damage, right? So that part, pretty annoying. And it's a lot of RNG attached to just that one S3 skill. Then you also have the S1, which is not 100% chance to burn. It's only going to be 75% chance, but you can soul burn it to actually get it guaranteed and get the AoE since you landed the burn. But the AoE, again, it's not 100% chance to burn. It's only going to be 60% chance, it's a little bit higher, to actually land the burn. But we haven't even talked about her best artifact, which is Abyssal Crown, which is a 25% chance to stun, on top of the 15% FRS. So when you compile that all together in the AoE, it's actually a lot of checks, which is one of the reasons true control. I'm not talking about Langy. Langy's not, like, Langy, yeah, she's control, but she's not like, you know, true control. But like true control doesn't really have too much of a place because honestly, there's so much RNG checks that most of the time it doesn't really do anything. But when it does, it feels so freaking good. So I definitely should make a video on MLR because there's definitely been some fights that I've had where I'm just like, oh my god, this unit's crazy broken. And then there's times where I'm like, this unit sucks. So definitely a lot with things with control. But now at the number 3, we have none other than Fairy Tail Tenebria, right? She, again, also very similar to Emilara. I know. We're getting into not like one not more control unit, but Fairy Tail Tenebria actually does have quite a lot of checks in her kit. A lot more MG than you may think. And she was meta for a very long time. She's still very strong when you pick her later in a draft, but she was very strong, but had so much RNG attached to her that it shows that in some scenarios, it can be really good. So what RNG is there actually, right? So first, the S3, there's a lot more checks as far as debuffs go for her to functionally be good, right? Even though MLR S3, there are more checks and more RNG, she only really needs to land the stun, whereas Fairy Tail Tenebria often has to land the strip and the rest of her debuffs, right? And there's always the 15% chance that they will miss. But that's very small, right? That's not as much. She also does have the crown that MLR also has to go through, but then you also have the S2, where you're getting even more of the RNG with actually landing the debuffs, and you have 3 different debuffs that you can cycle. Getting the decreased defense often will straight up just win your game, which is why this debuff, there's a 30% chance when you multiply that by the 4 units you actually have to hit. A lot of RNG goes into that because you have to get the right debuff on the right unit to really win. But because all the debuffs are really good and you're taking away turn 1, she's still very, very strong. And then on top of that, you have the S1 that's actually 50% chance to land the 2 burns, the 2 poisons. Very, very similar to MLR. The only reason I ranked her higher is mainly going to be because of the fact that she has to land her buffs to be effective, right? If she misses a lot of these, she ends up not doing a lot. And there are games where you'll see a Fairy Tail Tenebria miss everything, and you just kind of sit there and you're like, wow, that sucks, right? But then there are games she hits everything, and you're like, that should not also happen, right? Realistically, because of the 15% effectiveness FRS check, you should very rarely actually see a Fairy Tail Tenebria hit everything and every debuff all 3 times. If that happens, your RNG just sucks, right? And it's honestly one of the only real weaknesses that Fairy Tail has, aside from just actually countering her with other units. But again, very, very RNG type unit. But now, at number 2, we actually have a very slot machine type unit that is not a control unit, but it's actually going to be none other than your girl, Rinn. I honestly debated putting her first because she really does have a lot of RNG when you really get down to it. But Rinn is actually a slot machine, which is actually another inspiration for this video because she actually has a slot machine type skill on her S3. It is legitimately 2 random buffs. That's as RNG as you can possibly get, right? Why? There's times where, like, when you do this on 4 units, right, you want to obviously get the best buff, but in the best case, she's one of the most broken buffers in the game, and in some cases, she's just a nice little buffer that really doesn't do a lot and probably took a space of an actual, like, support unit, right? But what she actually does is pretty crazy, right? So you have the greater attack, which I believe she's one of the only ones. I just remember Hazel. But aside from like her and Hazel, she's one of the only really units that gives grab, right? Which is like a crazy good debuff. Increase hit chance, hit damage, defense, healing, evasion, immunity, right? In a perfect scenario, your tanks get like healing and defense, or healing or defense and evasion. Your DPSs get crit damage, evasion, or crit damage and gab, right? And you get the best buffs for yourself, but that's not gonna happen a lot. It's literally a slot machine. You can't really rely on the buffs to win you the game, but when it does, and when you get that Landy with like evasion and like crit damage buff, or and you have an attack buffer on top of that, it gets pretty crazy, right? It gets pretty cool, right? It's definitely a fun unit to actually watch in action, and I do know a lot of people that actually do like to use her. But that's not the only RNG she has in her kit. She's not only here because of that skill. Her S2 is also a control skill where she has a 75% chance to decrease defense, and then has a 50% chance to potentially use her S1. So, right, so she's got that extra turn layer. She's got the debuff that's not 100%. She's also got the 15% FRS check. And then on top of all that, her S1 is also a 75% chance to dispel a buff, right? So a lot of control along with that legitimately slot machine skill, right? So Rinn definitely enters one. But at number 1, we have a unit that I'm really sad is no longer meta because he used to be pretty fun. But we have none other than Benevolent Broman. If you guys didn't know, this guy was actually meta back in the day. Before Fairy Tail Tenebria came out, before Evasion, before all this crazy stuff, this guy used to be insanely meta and insanely RNG. It was legit. You would see Broman and it was just like, the game would open and it was like, all right, if Broman lands his stuff, we win the game. If he misses his stuff, we lose the game, right? It was a very interesting conundrum. Very fun watches and fun matches. I actually really like that meta. It was one of my favorite metas in Epic 7. I'm sure people do not miss the control days. But what does he actually do? Well, his S3 is one of the most unreliable control skills in the game, but it is for 2 turns, right? So he has a 70% chance, 75% chance to land a 2-turn silence. That's a lot. 2 turns of not getting to use your skills. Not all of your units can bypass this, right? If it lands, you're basically out of using your skills for those 2 turns. You know, Langy does way more than this guy does now, right? She has the silence and unable to be buffed, and she's consistent, but it's not 2 turns, right? The other part is that he also does dispel the buffs, and it's 2 buffs, which you often used to needed to have to be able to actually hit things like Fallen Cecilia, right? So very RNG skill on this one. It was so polarizing, as well as the Abyssal Crown just used to be so interesting, whether you got the crowns, the silences. And there were scenarios where you got every single silence and every single crown, which is a turn of hard CC that you couldn't stop with immunity. And then you got a follow-up soft CC skill. And it was just crazy how slot machine it was. But the S1 also does have a lot of RNG attached to it. And it often did make a difference because, again, you have all the crown checks that go along with this. The low chance to actually proc this. Although if they were silenced, you had a higher chance to actually proc it. And then, of course, the very RNG skill range. The only reason I really put him here, he may not be as slot machine as he used to be. Mostly just nostalgia, because he definitely did have a lot of RNG, and just because of how inconsistent some of his skills are as compared to some of the other units in the game right now, right? For control units. For control, this is extremely inconsistent, but it's so powerful, or used to be so powerful, it was actually really, really cool. But that's going to be all that I got for you guys today. I know it's kind of a letdown with the number one. Honestly, number one should have probably been Rinn. The Lion could have given her run for her money. But that's all I got for you guys today. I hope you all enjoyed. It's a fun little video while we're in preseason. But I will see you next time. Peace.